Week 4 of the NFL season is officially here, so in today's video, we are going to be predicting every single game of week number 4. So as I mentioned, we are going to be predicting every single game of week 4. We will begin with Thursday Night Football and we will be ending with Monday Night Football. Per usual, there will be timestamps, so if you guys want to skip around, go right ahead, but I suggest just watching the full video. And if you guys haven't already, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button because it helps me out a ton, but let's get into the video. And we are going to begin with our Thursday night matchup between the Dallas Cowboys and the New York Giants. The Dallas Cowboys have been struggling immensely, especially to stop the run. They went up against two good teams in the Saints and the Ravens, whereas the Giants haven't looked that good this year. They've also been struggling like the Cowboys. But at least for the Giants, their games have been somewhat competitive, and they're coming off a victory against the Cleveland Browns, which the Dallas Cowboys also beat them. And a big part of me is tempted to predict the Giants to win this one over Dallas, which honestly I never thought was going to happen. But at this point, with Dallas's struggles, it's something that I really do have to consider. But when I look at the Dallas Cowboys' weaknesses, which is stuffing the run and actually running the football, I don't think that those are weaknesses that this Giants team can necessarily exploit. I don't think this one's going to be a blowout like some of their past matchups because I just think this Dallas Cowboys team is extremely flawed. But I do believe that Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb will be able to get the job done. So I am going to pick the Dallas Cowboys to win this one in a bit of a shootout, with the final score being 31 Dallas to the 21 of the New York Giants. Then we begin our Sunday noon games between the Carolina Panthers and the Cincinnati Bengals. The Carolina Panthers looked very good last week with Andy Dalton riding the ship, so we have to assume that he's going to do it yet again next week. And then there's the Cincinnati Bengals, who have been struggling immensely and are sort of in a must-win game in week 4 and for the next couple weeks. And in this matchup, you're dealing with two teams that have sort of the opposite side of talent. This Bengals team is extremely talented, whereas this Panthers team really does lack talent. I know this will be a bit of a homecoming for Andy Dalton as he's going up against his old team, so that could give them a little bit of some extra motivation. But I just have too much respect for this Bengals team. I think this Bengals team is way more talented and has the potential to still be a good team, but they actually have to go out there and put it on the field. So for Carolina, I think they're going to play really good this week, but I am going to give the victory to the Cincinnati Bengals because I think they're offensively just a little bit better than Carolina. So with that being said, I have the final score being 30 Cincinnati to 20 the Carolina Panthers. Then we have an NFC South matchup between the New Orleans Saints and the Atlanta Falcons. I would say of all the games we have this week, this one might be the toughest one to predict, because you have this Falcons team that has looked pretty impressive the past couple weeks. Obviously, they had that very impressive win over the Philadelphia Eagles where they came from behind. And then even though they lost on Monday Night Football to the Chiefs, they played a really sharp game where they could have won that game if a couple things went their way. But now they have a matchup against a Saints team that is off to a really good start for their season. Unfortunately, the Saints did lose to the Eagles, which is the same team that the Falcons beat. These two teams are in a lot of ways pretty similar. They have older quarterbacks that are starting to play some good football, pretty similar rosters. Both defenses are good. Offensive lines are playing pretty well. So this is a really even matchup that I think could go either way. But ultimately, I kind of think that those first 2 weeks for the Saints maybe made us a little bit too dramatic and a little bit too optimistic about the Saints team. Now, hold your horses. I'm not criticizing the Saints for winning those games. They dominated the Cowboys. They dominated the Panthers. But I think at this point, we can kind of see that those two teams they beat aren't as good as maybe we once thought they would be. So with that being said, I don't really know who to predict here, but I am going to just give it to the Falcons. I think they're a tad bit more talented on the defensive side over a team like the Saints, who, yes, are veterans and play good football. But I think that Falcons defense can play some good ball against them. They're pretty good against the run. So I'm going to go with the Falcons 24 to the Saints 17. I would not be shocked if I'm wrong at all. This is a really close matchup. Then we have another division matchup between the Jaguars and the Texans, of course, now in the AFC South. And this Jaguars team, let's just put it as it is. It freaking sucks. It is a really bad team that has talent, but is just really not going in the right direction. Offensive line is pathetic. The run game is nowhere to be existent right now. The passing game is really weak with Trevor Lawrence struggling. And defensively, their secondary is just not good. And they're heading into a matchup against a pissed off Texans team that had an embarrassing loss last week to the Minnesota Vikings. So they're going to be going out there and trying to put up a bit of a statement against a Jaguars team that has a little bit of talent. Yes, you could say this Jaguars team will also come into this game pissed off because they got blown out by the Bills. but they're 0-3 and they haven't looked good the entire season, whereas this Texans team has. So I am going to give this one to the Texans, and I think it's not going to be that close. I have the final score of this game being 27 Houston to 9 for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Moving on to an AFC matchup between the New York Jets and the Denver Broncos. This is a game in which you have a young quarterback in Bo Nix, one of the youngest in the NFL, going up against an older quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, who I want to say is the oldest quarterback in the NFL. So this would be a very fun matchup against two teams that are kind of going in different directions. The Broncos are rebuilding, whereas the Jets are trying to contend. And even though I liked what I saw last week from Bo Nix and that Broncos offense and defense, I don't think it's going to be able to stack up well against a way more talented Jets team. I think the Jets should be able to do basically whatever they want offensively, whether it's passing the ball or running the ball. It will be a fun matchup between Pat Surtain and Garrett Wilson. That could be very interesting, but ultimately I do think eventually this Jets team will be able to really open this one up and probably dominate the rest of the half. So with that said, I have the final score being 28 to the Jets to 10 for the Denver Broncos. Again, I think this Broncos team is heading in the right direction, but this is a really tough matchup against a really good defense. Then we have an NFC North matchup between the Minnesota Vikings and the Green Bay Packers. The Vikings have looked awesome thus far through the season. In fact, I just made a video of them yesterday, so after this video, go ahead and check that out if you guys want to see anything about the Vikings. A bit of a summary of that video. I think this Vikings team is playing really well offensively. Sam Darnold has looked good, and their defense has looked great as well. And then there's this Packers team that lost in week 1, but the past 2 weeks, Malik Willis has looked really good, and they've been able to win some tough matchups. But in this game, I just think this one is maybe a little bit too much for this Packers team to overcome. You're in a situation where you do have a backup quarterback in, and yes, Malik Willis has looked good, and I do think he'll continue to look good. But from what I've seen thus far from this Vikings defense that has made quarterbacks like Brock Purdy and CJ Stroud struggle, I just have a really hard time convincing myself that Malik Willis will play better than Brock Purdy or CJ Stroud. With that said, I do think this Packers defense will keep this one competitive, and I think it's going to be a bit of a slug-it-out game where both teams throw haymakers. It just might come down to which team has the ball last. So with that being said, I'm going to give the victory to the Minnesota Vikings with a final score of 21-14. Then we have an AFC matchup between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts, I think, are 1-2, whereas the Steelers are 3-0 and have played some really good football. And initially, when trying to pick who I thought was going to win this game, I initially picked the Indianapolis Colts because I felt as if that offense would be able to do a lot of really good things against a really good Steelers defense, until I started to kind of come around and sort of come to my senses a tad bit. This is a Colts defense that is not really good against the run. In fact, they get ran on quite a bit these first couple weeks. And this is also a Colts offense that turns the ball over a lot. And unless this Colts offense can really get Jonathan Taylor going, I don't really see how they're going to be able to move the ball consistently down the field unless it's in chunk plays. And given the fact that this is a Steelers team that can force turnovers, can get pressure on quarterbacks, and can run the ball offensively, it's kind of a little bit of a recipe for disaster for this Colts team. Now, I do think this one will be a close game because I'm a big believer in Shane Steichen and that offense, but I do believe the Steelers are a bit better of a talent pool right now on the defensive side that can make up for, what the offense may struggle in. So with that being said, I have the final score being Pittsburgh 24 to the Indianapolis Colts 21. Moving on, we have an NFC showdown between the Chicago Bears and the LA Rams, a matchup that is really hard to predict, but given everything that I've seen, I think I've made a pretty valid case for who I have winning. The LA Rams are obviously dealing with a plethora of injuries. Of course, Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are your two biggest name guys that are facing injuries right now, and that can definitely present some issues to a veteran like Matthew Stafford. But this is a really weird matchup where this Rams defense is really bad against the run, but pretty good against the pass. Whereas this Bears team isn't very good at running the football and isn't very good at passing the football yet. And even though Caleb Williams has looked better week by week, he still hasn't looked really good quite yet. He had his best game last week, but also threw 2 interceptions, so it's kind of hard to say whether he was good or not. Given the fact that this is a veteran LA Rams team that has a lot of newer pieces, but a lot of veterans that are kind of carrying them along the way, I do think this Rams team has a bit of an upper hand here. I believe this one will be sort of a slug-it-out game that's really ugly, maybe a lot of turnovers, a lot of bad football, but some really good defense, and I think that gives a bit of an advantage to a team like the LA Rams, who have a veteran quarterback, a veteran head coach, and a bunch of guys who have been there and done that. Whereas this Bears team, yes, they can win ugly games. Obviously, we saw that in week 1. But right now, given the fact from what I've seen from Caleb, it can't really be compared to a veteran like Matthew Stafford that knows how to make the right plays and knows how to go down the field and put a drive together to win a game. So because of that, I am going to give this one to the LA Rams with a final score of 17-14. Then we have our last noon game between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a rematch of course, wild card playoffs from last year where the Buccaneers embarrassed the Eagles. Unfortunately, this is really not going to be that fair of a matchup for the Eagles. They are dealing with a plethora of injuries. Lane Johnson, Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown, and I believe Darius Slay is also potentially out. So those are 4 potential starters who may be missing in this game. So that is a big upper hand advantage to a team like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who got embarrassed last week and are trying to get back in the who are trying to get back in stride and start playing good football again. And I kind of think that's part of the reason why I think this Buccaneers team might win this game. I think this Eagles team is good. I wouldn't say they've impressed me thus far this season. Yes, they had a good week 1 victory that was pretty impressive against Jordan Love and the Packers. But in the last 2 weeks, they had a meltdown to the Falcons, and they also had a bunch of issues against the Saints, where they probably should have won that game by a lot more, but the coaching really was holding them back the entire game. And here we are going up against a Buccaneers team that is in need of a victory, especially after last week, is well coached, has a quarterback that's playing well, and you're dealing with all these injuries. If you're the Eagles, this one's going to be a lot to overcome. So I'll say this, if this Eagles team doesn't turn the ball over and is well coached and takes their points, doesn't go for a lot of 4th downs, especially dumb 4th downs, then they should be able to win this game. But because from what I've seen, I don't know if they're going to be able to do that. I'm going to give the victory to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with a final score of 31-20. But now we head into our 3 o'clock matchups, beginning with the Patriots versus the San Francisco 49ers. The 49ers have not looked good this year, but this is a really easy matchup for this Niners team. This is really a game where the talent discrepancy is just really big. This Patriots offense, let's just admit it, really can't do nothing but run the football. I love Brissett, but he just doesn't have an offensive line. He doesn't have the weapons to really sustain a good offense. Whereas this Niners team is coming off some bad losses to the Vikings and then last week to the Minnesota Vikings. So I feel like this is a bit of a get-right game for them. They're still dealing with injuries, but I just think this much talent discrepancy is going to really favor a team like San Francisco. They're an offensive-minded team that can move the ball down the field. Brock Purdy's still playing good football, and I think this defense should be able to kind of get some pieces going in the right direction. So this is a bit of a get-right game for the Niners. I have them winning with a final score of 31-12. And then we have maybe my most anticipated game of the week, or maybe one of, between the Washington Commanders and the Arizona Cardinals, which is just so crazy to say, but these are 2 of the most fun quarterbacks to currently watch, Kyler Murray and Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels just had a game of his life against the Cincinnati Bengals on Monday Night Football. That was such an incredible game. And if he can do that against this Cardinals team, then I think there's a really good chance the Washington Commanders win. But I'm going to give the slight advantage to the Arizona Cardinals. This is a Washington defense that doesn't really have a good pass rush. They are not necessarily the greatest at stuffing the run, and when it comes to their corners, they're going to get schooled by those guys that the Cardinals have. This could be a game that is very high scoring, but I have a feeling that this game won't be terribly high scoring. I think the thing that is going to hold back these offenses is going to be, can they get the ball in the end zone? I think the team that has the better red zone efficiency might be able to win this game, but given the fact that I just have a little bit more faith in the veteran and Kyler Murray, I'm going to give them the slight advantage. I think this one goes deep into the 4th quarter. Maybe a game-winning play could change this one up. It might be the first team to make a mistake wins this game, or I should say loses this game. So with that said, I'm going to go with the Arizona Cardinals to win 20-17. Then we have a divisional matchup between the Kansas City Chiefs, who have looked ridiculously good so far, going up against a Chargers team that has also looked good, but is now dealing with a plethora of injuries. And I really don't feel like I have to say too much about this one. This Chargers team is going into this week probably without Justin Herbert, so it feels like a very unfair matchup for this team. You also have the Derwin James suspension and several other injuries along the way. Whereas this Chiefs team has looked basically unbeatable for the first 3 weeks. Yes, Travis Kelce has been terrible, but it hasn't really stopped this offense. They've still looked really good. And even though I do think this Chargers team will be able to get a couple of things going, I just feel as if ultimately it's a lot to overcome, especially if you are playing with your backup quarterback. If Herbert does play and if he's 100% and can actually throw the football, this game gets a bit more interesting. I still think the Chiefs are by far the favorite, but it could be a closer matchup. but because I don't think Herbert will play in this matchup, I have the Chiefs winning 24-7. And then we have our last 3 o'clock game between the Cleveland Browns and the Las Vegas Raiders. I expect a really ugly football game here. The Browns offensively are just completely inept, whereas this Raiders offense has some capabilities, but they don't have a good offensive line and they can't run the ball efficiently, and that's going to present a lot of issues, especially going up against a Browns defense that is really good. And then on the other side of the ball with the Browns offense, they also have their fair share of issues. Injuries on the offensive line, a running game that isn't good, and quarterback play that is arguably the worst in the NFL. So again, I do expect this one to be some really ugly football, and for me, it might just come down to which team has more playmakers that can make a play with the ball in their hands. And if you're asking me between Amari Cooper and Jerry Jeudy or Brock Bowers and Devontae Adams and all those guys, I'm probably taking the Raiders. I also just think that Gardner Minshew is slightly better than Deshaun Watson. I expect an ugly football game with a whole bunch of field goals and not a lot of offense, but I'm going to pick the Raiders to win 16-10. Then we have a matchup between two very good teams, one that has looked good and one that hasn't looked good, but we all know is good. Between the Buffalo Bills and the Baltimore Ravens, the Bills are coming off 3 straight very impressive victories where their offense has looked fantastic, whereas this Ravens team has had a bunch of issues but is coming off a fairly dominant victory against the Dallas Cowboys. And this is a pretty tough matchup to predict because we haven't really seen this Bills team be seriously tested. They had a very fun matchup week 1 against the Cardinals, but they were just sort of able to out-talent that team. And the last 2 weeks, they've been going up against some really bad teams. Whereas this Ravens team has been tested, but hasn't necessarily passed those tests. In week 1, they lost to the Chiefs. Then they had a pretty inexplicable loss to a team in the Las Vegas Raiders. And then last week against the Dallas Cowboys, they dominated for 3 quarters and they still almost lost because they played so bad in the 4th. So for me, it's really hard to predict the Ravens to win this matchup when they haven't been playing good football, especially with how good this Bills team has been playing. So because of that, I am going to pick the Bills to win. I think Josh Allen currently is playing like the best quarterback in the NFL. And unless Lamar Jackson can Superman this thing and carry this team to a victory, which he very well could do, I just kind of have a feeling that Josh Allen and that offense is a little bit too highly powered for this Ravens team that is really struggling right now. So because of that, I think it is a close game that comes down to the wire, but I have the Ravens losing with a final score of Buffalo 28 to the Ravens 24. But then for the second week in a row, we have 2 Monday Night Football games, which I don't like at all. And that's because you have to watch one game on your smartphone while the other game is on the TV. I don't get why there isn't a broadcast that just has both teams playing at the same time. That would be so much easier to watch. But it is what it is. Honestly, one of these games is really bad, so I'll probably only be paying attention to one of them. And that game that is just going to be some really ugly football is between the Titans and the Dolphins. Now, as of when I'm making this video, I still believe that Skylar Thompson will be the starting quarterback for the Dolphins. And if that's the case, then I think this one is a really obvious victory to the Titans. Yes, the Titans have been playing some really bad football, but they're still a good defensive team that can create some turnovers and make some plays to put that offense in good positions. And while I think this Dolphins defense will be able to do some good things to keep them in the game for a big portion of it, I do feel as if eventually they're going to be able to put enough points to win this game. And because I believe this Titans defense will be able to basically shut out that Dolphins offense because Skylar Thompson just is not a good quarterback and whoever their backup is isn't good either. So because I think they can do that, I feel as if this one is a pretty easy victory that honestly, I might skip this whole game entirely. I won't skip it, but I'll definitely be putting on the next game as soon as it starts. But I have the final score being Tennessee 20 to Miami Dolphins 3. And then lastly, we have a Monday night showdown between the Seahawks and the Detroit Lions. This one is going to be very interesting and very telling for both these teams. For Seattle, you haven't really been tested all that much. Everyone thought the Seahawks would get tested against the Miami Dolphins, and then Tua Tagovailoa went out, so you were going up against a really bad Dolphins team. And outside of that, you haven't really been tested all that much. Whereas this Lions team has been tested, but has passed and also failed at the same time. Obviously, they won that big week 1 matchup, and then week 2 happened where you lost to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and then you recovered in week 3 against the Cardinals. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster for this Lions team where offensively they haven't looked great, but they've also had some really good moments. Whereas this Seahawks team has also kind of followed suit where they've had some really good moments and also have had some really bad moments. So this one is a bit of a toss-up for me. I do know who I think will win this game, and I think everyone should agree with me, but I wouldn't be shocked if one team were to come out on top that maybe nobody expects. So with that said, I do think Detroit will be able to win this game. I just feel as if they're going to be able to get their offense going. This one should be a pretty tightly contested game, but I think in that fourth quarter, the Lions will be able to put some drives together, stop the Seahawks offensively, and, make some plays. I think Aiden Hutchinson should be in for a really big game. He could honestly spoil this one for the Seahawks just by himself. So with that said, I have the Detroit Lions winning with a final score of 31-17. So these are my picks right here. As you guys can see, my record has been diminishing every single week. I had a 12-4 record in week 1, and the last 2 weeks have been really bad for me. So hopefully these picks right here will be able to pick my record back up. I think that this week could definitely help me do so. And if you enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.